Right, can I please call this meeting to order? If you're all looking at me saying that daft idiot's talking into a microphone, I still can't hear a word he's saying, it's because this isn't for your benefit. It's for the benefit of the millions on the World Wide Web. Who am I kidding? For a wee experiment tonight, we're actually broadcasting this live on YouTube. Now, before you all run for your car and worry about mugshots and stuff like that, there's no camera in play. It's just the screen that's going onto the web, plus the voice through this microphone, hence is why I'm using this, okay? Hopefully you can hear me because it's a big sea of faces out there. This is about the third or fourth time we've done this, where we've done a family history in the society, and we're going to have to radically rethink either taking over the square box or something. The worst we had was we had 60 odd for the Cuddies, we had 70 odd for the Donnellys. I don't know how many's here tonight, but I've already told someone in the audience to tell the health and safety officer to look the other way, please. Anyhow, I'm doing the, no, we've got a couple of, well, one seat free up here, and I think there's one down there if there's anybody still standing. No, I'm for that one, sorry. One over here, yeah. Sorry. Right, okay, I'll try and talk a bit louder, sorry. Right, I'm doing the introductions tonight. Normally it would be Brendan, but I said it would be distinctly self-serving for him to introduce himself, particularly in front of the wider family. So basically, Brendan and Jerome, his brother, has been working on this really on and off for quite some time. Jerome, certainly a good long time. 82, yeah. And I mean, most of us understand that who have done similar things. But things for most of us who are doing family research has changed radically in the last 10 years with the internet and with the development of huge databases of information. And that has been a game changer. It has made our lives a lot easier. But in some ways it has provided a level of confusion too, because there's just so much information sometimes to have to work through. But the boys have brought this together for tonight. And obviously to make it as widely known to the rest of you Hollands and non-Hollands who are out there. And I know I'm certainly looking forward to it. And I'll not waste any more time and hand you over to Brendan, okay?
Thank you, Jonathan. First thing I'm going to ask is anybody who is a Holland or whose mother's a Holland, please stand up. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, anybody wants to pick a row with me, that's my army. I welcome you all here tonight to Kilishal Clonanese Historical Society. This is our 10th year actually in existence, and we are going from strength to strength because it's not about individuals in this group, it's about a team of very, very dedicated and hard-working committee members. You'll see that through the efforts of the ladies tonight who provided you all with refreshments. And I think we should show our appreciation for that. Thank you. I have a special welcome to a distant cousin that I didn't know about until 12 months ago. Bonjour, Jocelyne retournée en Montréal à Quebec. Jocelyne is our distant cousin. Her great-grandfather and great-grandmother left the shores of Ireland in 1830. And we'll tell her story later on. I also say hello to all the Hollands in London and throughout the UK, and to Jerry McCahey in Perth, and to Patrick Holland in London, and to his mum and dad in Madrid. Somebody once said, when they were reading out this list of honours of different people who were interested, who were all attached to the family, somebody jumped up from the audience and said, You didn't tell anybody you're from Macinduff, but actually we are. Many of us are from Macinduff. Some of us are, and some of us are not. Now, before we launch into this, it's been a work of pleasure. Your own family history is special. It's about you and about what it is that makes you what you are and what your family are about. And it's what turns people on, and some places it bores the pants of other people. But in our case, it always was something that we were always interested in. And I suppose really the interest that we have was fostered by our dad, who was a unique individual in that when he was 18 years old in 1921 or 23, his father's first cousin, who was his next door neighbour, a man called Jimmy Holland, told him the family history orally, right back to our great-great-grandfather. And I'm looking at some people in the audience here, the younger members, your great-great-great-grandfather. And he remembered everything he was told, and he was 100% accurate in that. 100%, because we checked it all out through the parish records, through census records, and other records that we'll refer to later on. And it's typical of people of that era who received little or no education but had a very basic high intelligence and were able to commit things to memory without writing them down. It's a special talent. The one thing he didn't know, and Jerome and I have laughed about it many times since, he was a man of his time after all. He died in 1984. And we said, well, there's one you didn't know about, a little skeleton in the cupboard. And he said, what was that? I said, well, there was a woman, Rose Holland, and she had an illegitimate child. And he went, in 1830. And he says, is that right? And then he went, oh God, no. Today, no one's bat an eyelid, but in those days, and he was a man of his time, like everybody else through the realms of history, I'm delighted to see so many people here tonight, and I hope that you all enjoy the presentation. There are some things that some of you will already know, and most of the things that you won't already know. So let's start. The name O'Halloran is the Irish version of Ulster, Holland. We had thought that it may have been a variation of Mulholland, which in Irish was O'Meal Hallan. But in fact, through the good assistance of my friend in the audience here, Martin Mellon, from, above all places, Slough-Neil. Martin is an absolute mine of information on the Irish language, on medieval Irish history and so on and so forth. And he's a great friend of the society. He gave a talk here just a couple of months ago. But we discovered anyway through our joint work together that O'Halloran is the actual Irish name, the correct Irish name. And if we go on then, you can see here all the different variations that was anglicised around the time of the end of the 9 Years' War, when Hugh O'Neill was defeated, and then later on through the 1641 rebellion and the Cromwellian period, and then into the penal days. So we have, as you can see, O'Hallan, H-E-A-L-A-N-E. And that's not far away from O'Halloran, if you think about it. And then we have various versions of that, O'Hallan with an I, and then O'Hallan with two L's, A-N-E. And then we see O'Halloran, O-H-E-O-L-A-N-E. And then O'Hallan, and then the first time we see is this one, O'Holland. And then it goes on and on and on. I won't bore you with it. But the name is a descendant of Whalon. diminutive of whale, the Irish word for a wolf. And anybody that knows the Hollands will say no more. In other parts of Ireland, the name Holland has been anglicised from completely different names like Houlihan and Highland. Nothing to do with us. We are uncontaminated O'Hillines. Okay. So the surname occurs in Ireland here in this variation, but as you can see, Cork has the highest, and that would be Houlihan. Okay, so if we go to Tyrone and Monaghan, we are an Armagh. That's more closely to the Hollands, and we'll elaborate on that for a time being. And the other thing about it is, only thing I can bring a personal experience to this is I had my DNA analysed about a year ago, and it gives you your racial what your racial background is, and it's 100% Ulster Irish. So all those Hollands that stood up, you should be content in your own skin. Okay, we'll move on then, and here's the religious breakdown of Hollands in County Tyrone. You can see that 79 of the 120, around 66% are 23, about 16% are Church of Ireland, and 16 are Presbyterian, and 2 are Plymouth Brethren. Now, there is a reason for that. Some of those that are Church of Ireland or Presbyterian are descendant from planter Hollands, people who came here, whose ancestors came here after the plantation, or during or after the plantation. So that was taken from the 1901 census. So it gives you an idea, roughly, the distribution of the Holland name then. So the planter Hollands are a fairly large grouping as well. But the one person who knows more about them than anything else, and the man who has actually been instrumental in putting this whole presentation together, is our resident genealogist, historical expert, and a whole lot of other things that I could think of that I could call him. But more than anything, he is my best friend. I've no problem in saying that. He is a gentleman and has been of enormous help to Jerome and I in putting this together. It's Jonathan. And please show your appreciation.
No pressure there. Right. Hold on a wee second. I just need to move this keyboard up so we can move through these for you. Yeah, the planter Hollands, when we look for planter families, probably the first place we sort of look is there was an Irish Commission of 1622 that looked at the plantation. And in some respects, it recorded the names of planter families who were part of that plantation. So we looked to see, right, how many planter Hollands are there in Ulster? Surprisingly little. So we did find, however, these guys. So what I have here is a map of basically South Tyrone and North Monaghan. And obviously we've Auchnacloy up here. And I'm pointing here to Favour Royal. And in the Ulster plantation, a Henry Holland was a fee farmer promised a freehold on the estate of Sir Thomas Ridgway. And that became known as the Port Clare or Favour Royal estate. Moving that forward 20 odd years, we see a Thomas Holland presented on a muster roll. That's all males over 15 years of age. He has no arms, but he is possibly the son of this Henry Holland. And he's on the estate of Sir Henry Tichborne in Clogher. And these are just a couple of examples of the source material we used to find that out. Now, roll forward another 10 years, we have the Irish Rebellion of 1641. And there were depositions given by those who had witnessed things or had lost possessions or whatever. And lo and behold, in the middle of the depositions, we have Roger Holland and William Holland with a long list of they took this, they took that, they took this, they took that, etc. And they seem to have made their way to Glaslough. When Clogher was under attack in 1641, a lot of the inhabitants of that settlement moved to Glaslough for safety and held out there successfully. Moving forward a wee bit more, and we're into the hearth money rolls of the 1660s. And we see a William Holland and a Nicholas Holland in County Monaghan at Tillydan and Banagher, which is just outside Glaslough, just to the north of Glaslough. And rolling forward a wee bit further, we have a will in the Clogher Diocese for Tillydan for William Holland and a Henry Holland. And this is them appearing up here as well. So that's a map showing you where. So this is Glaslough, and this is the townlands of Tillydan and Drumbanagher. Okay. Now, roll things forward. We're quite lucky. Obviously, these people would have been of means. They would have had a substantial land grant in the plantation, and their ability then to survive, albeit rebellions and things like that, would present obviously major threats and problems. But this planter Holland family did survive all that and stayed in and around Monaghan. And we see here further wills in the 1800s. We see a Henry and a Rachel. And again, we have deed memorials of land dated in the mid-1700s for Roger Holland of Mullaban and a Henry Holland in the town in 1805. So we can say there was at least one family of Hollands were planters, and that family obviously was relatively successful and had descendants right the way up into the 1800s and beyond. I haven't taken it into the modern era, if you like, but it certainly shows plenty of evidence that that particular family did survive quite successfully. Yeah. As well, yeah, right. Yeah. Brilliant. So they moved down before the Clogher raids. That's brilliant. Because I couldn't find any evidence, just except for the depositions. So, but they seem to have settled, and all the evidence that I found, it seems to make that Monaghan, North Monaghan area primarily their heartland. I can't see, without studying in more detail, I can't see much evidence how much they would have spread further. So, I'll hand it back now to Brendan.
Remiss of me, the gentleman who was giving the information to Jonathan just now is called Patrick Holland. And I think he is one of about 5 in the audience, most of whom are not related, that we know of. Some are, but most aren't. But Patrick actually is the chairperson or the chairman of the Clogher Historical Society. A very long-established society, and I've been amazed by Patrick, the breadth of the knowledge that Patrick carries, and it's great to see that he's also a Holland. When I'm on the subject of Hollands, this row here, the guy with the glasses and the blue jacket on him, 4 or 5 rows from the front, is Pat from the village of Clady near Strabane. He's an old adversary of mine when I was on the GAA League Board, and himself and a guy called Hugo Laverty were representative of the Ernie Club, who had at that time a not very good distinguished record in discipline. But Pat is a long-standing friend, someone I've known for 40-odd years, I suppose, Pat. And these are his cousins, all along this row, apart from Martin here. Most of them are from Sound Mills and Clogher. And they are part of the Holland family, and we'll go on later to show you how that came around. Okay, Jonathan? Now, here we have the town of Dungannon's in the blue here. It's Drumcoo, but actually it's Dungannon. And the towns all around, the townlands all around it are townlands where you would have found Holland. Now, the first mention are these 3 gentlemen here, Hugh O'Holland in Lisnadlin, which is, you can point that out, Jonathan, yeah. Then we have Shan O'Hullen in Killyneal next door. And north of that, in the townland of Cosh, we have Turlough O'Helan. So already you're seeing the mixed up translation of whoever the scribes were that were recording these names. Yeah, this is in 1664. So this is our baseline for Hollands in Dungannon. So if we do a quick calculation there, I think you'll find it's around 355 years. Am I correct in saying that? So we've been around a while. The next one we have is on a William Holland, a clothier in the townland of Tartlachen. Tartlachen being, let me see, of course, right here. Right here. Then we have the religious census of 1766, which is 100 years after this. And we have a James Holland and a Hugh Holland, one in Dungarvan and one in Ranaghan. Now, we were sort of trying to, well, Jonathan and I were both trying to figure out where this Dungarvan was. So we thought it had to be around Edendork or Killyman. So through the GAA, I know a couple of people that live in that area, and both of them are here tonight, Terry McShane and Peter O'Connor. And we asked them, do you know where Dungarvan is? Nah, don't know. Don't know. And eventually we did find out, because in the 1830s, when they did the Ordnance Survey, they changed the name of the townland, which I'll talk about later. And then we found, Jonathan found, in St Andrew's Church of Ireland, Killyman Cemetery, a Henry Holland, H-E-N-E-R-E-Y, dated the 10th of March, 1759, aged 63, which meant he was born in 1696. And we have another Francis Holland then on the 29th of May, 1776, born died 1776 and born in 1715. So here we have evidence of Hollands in this area from the Hearth Money Roll 1664 right through to here. And then in 1772, we're not showing the headstones yet. Then we have a William Holland here in the townland of Tartlachen, which is here. Tartlachen, that should read. And then they started recording baptisms in the Catholic Church in Dungannon in the 1780s. And we have entries for Holland with an A, two Hollands with one with an E, one with an A, one with an O, and Hillen. Again, the parish priest, or whoever he was at the time, it comes down to his interpretation of what they say their name is. And of course, it's the beginning of the Anglicization of the language and the death, I suppose, the beginning of the death of the Irish language. And then we have a freeholders list. Now, freeholders were people who actually virtually owned the land. They weren't paying rent to a landlord like all the other Josephs. And those are John and Henry Holland in the townland of Killymaddy-Knox, which is just southwest here of the town. Now, you might say, why are we including those? Well, we're including those because we think these Hollands and these Hollands are all related, but somewhere along the line, for social reasons of social advancement or economic advantage or whatever, they changed religion from Roman Catholic to Church of Ireland. And then in 1796, a John Holland from Drumglass, which is just north of the town on the Coal Island Road, was an article about him. He was a brown linen sealmaster holder. That meant it was a quality scheme that they were operating at the time, I suppose is the best way to describe it. And he lost it because the quality of his linen was not up to standard. But we can't do anything about that now. But the fact of the matter is his name is recorded, and that's good to know. So you can see the townlands that all of us, I think, originated from. Okay? And here we have Henry Holland and Francis Holland. Can we all read this? Okay. And you can see this man was born in 1696, as I told you earlier. And how do we know that they were of the... This is in... You'll see the two graves are in Killyman Church of Ireland graveyard. So you will assume that they were Church of Ireland persuasion, but in fact they're not. And the giveaway is the inscription at the top of the headstone, IHS, which is an abbreviation of the Greek word meaning Jesus. And that's a giveaway for their religious denomination. Obviously Roman Catholic. So these are their two graves. They're still in existence. So we move on to St. Patrick's Old English Graveyard. That's beside the chapel in English. And here we have the first one. Here lieth ye body of Thomas Holland, late of Muller Longfield, who died August the 12th, 1765, aged 38. A lot of people died, in middle age, and some, as you can see, like Patrick Holland. There's that bloody name again. Patrick Holland, who departed this life February the 12th, 1779, aged 17. So here we have Hollands out. Muller Longfield, for those of you who have a local knowledge, is a village just to the north of English, quite close to where the football pitch is there. And beside where Muller Fish Ponds used to be, heading up towards Brantry. That's the town. I see Kieran McAnnan nodding, so I must have got it right. There you go. And here we have a map of the English graveyard, and their numbers 263 and 264. So if any of you want to take a note of that, a mental note or a written note, you can go visit that grave. Because undoubtedly these are people that are of our bloodline. Okay, and the same would apply, of course, to those in Killyman. Now, do you remember that famous townland that we couldn't find? Peter Connon couldn't find it, and Terry McShane couldn't find it. It's called Dungarvan. But Eagle Eyes here saw an OS map in the 1860s, and it's got Dungarvan Hill, and it's the townland of Killibrackie. And one of the things that it also says down here is Drumglass Colliery. That's an important thing to note, and I'll explain that later, because there is a link with coal mining to the family that goes on and on. Okay? Now, see how extensive this was. Here we have the townland of Killibrackie. Here we have Killyleck Rossmore, and up here we have Curran. So this is a huge area that was being mined. But the seam of coal was actually quite shallow. The revolution was taken off in Ireland, and they wanted to get this coal to Dublin to actually drive that revolution. Okay. Naming convention. Now, why have we included this? Earlier on, I was talking to, I think it was Pat Holland of, am I right? Sign Mills down here, this man? Lawrence or Pat? Lawrence. By the way, Lawrence, if you look over your right shoulder, he's got his glasses above his head. He's also Lawrence. Now, what I'm going to say to you is this. This is an important tool for anyone who wants to research their family history. Because this naming convention applies not just to Irish families, but those who have Scottish ancestry as well. And I don't have to, you can all read that, can you? The first son is named after the father's father. The second son is named after the mother's father, etc., etc., etc. And I want you all to keep that in mind and try and remember it, because you'll see how, as an aid to tracing your family, it can be. How it actually work in your favour. Now, the Hollands disappeared from Dungannon. They disappeared entirely from all those townlands that we know of, and some of them ended up in the town itself. Now, we know that they were in these townlands up to the late 1700s. Now, in the late 1700s, the population of Ireland was mushrooming. It was nearly going up 20% per annum or something crazy like that. So within a few short years, it was actually doubling its size. And because it was still largely an agricultural economy, with ordinary crops as one source of income, but flax was the main earner because it supported a very huge linen industry. Excuse me. He's no friend of mine. Anyway, the important thing to remember is that the pressure for land was such that unless you had good relations with your landlord, you were very, very vulnerable to being moved on. And all these families were moved on. And we think, from what we know, some of them were moved west to Killishall, further west to Clogher, and some even maybe perhaps west to Knockatallon in County Monaghan. And many people here, put your hand up, have your ancestry in Knockatallon. Patrick, anyone else? Right. Okay, well, Knockatallon, for those who don't know, is an area quite close to the Fermanagh, Monaghan and Tyrone, where the three counties meet. An upland area, not of great agricultural value, but it was land that people could scrape a living out of. We also got to remember the period we're talking about is the beginning of the penal laws. So if you had the name, or if you were of the Roman Catholic denomination, you were in big trouble. You were at the bottom of the social pile and the bottom of the economic pile. So you are at the mercy of the landlord and his agent, more particularly his agent. The landlord were largely removed, and most of them didn't really care about their tenants as long as the rent kept coming in. And the idea was to get as many tenants in that would be reliable to pay the rent. And as they saw it, they were better with Protestant tenants than Catholic tenants. Now, there's little point in having a sectarian argument about this 200 years on, because that really serves no purpose. But it is a fact of history that helps us understand why population movements of this type occurred. And I don't wish to labour the point, but it is a fact of history, and that's all we can do about it. Some of this movement of population was aided by groups like the Killyman Wreckers, the People Day Boys, who were basically sectarian groups who went around intimidating people out of their homes and telling them to get out. It also explains why a number of Ulster-sounding names you'll find in Mayo and Galway, because that's where they ended up from that period. Right, so here we have in a Henry Holland had a daughter, Catherine, born in 1783, and a son, James, born in 1788. I want you to take a note of the names again, okay? We have Terence Holland. Francis had child 1785. Terence is Turlough. Do you remember Turlock 100 years previously? Patrick Holland, another bloody Patrick. Edward Holland. Now, there's an interesting name. And then we had his children, Rose, James, and John. Nothing really weird about that, apart from James and John shared the same birthday. They were twins. And that is a remarkable trait of the Holland family. I was talking to our friends from up near Clary and from Clare, and their families have twins. Our family has twins. In fact, I'm the father of twins. So, it just comes down the generations, Then we have Thomas Holland, who's had a daughter, Bridget. Henry Holland again with a son, Henry. James had Sarah, John, James, and Patrick, born between 1825 and 1831. And then another Patrick, with his son Patrick, born in 1832. Another Thomas, Mary is born in 1832. And a Peter Holland. Now, notice the spelling, that's their name in the birth registry. And we have an Anne born and an Alice born to Peter Holland in 1827 and 38. And then we have a Francis Holland born in 1834, a Henry born to Francis Holland in 1834. So we know the Hollands were in the Dungannon area until then. We know that because this is the Dungannon baptismal register we're looking at. Now, just remember the James and John guys, because they're important. Okay, let's move on. Now, the Hollands of Killymatty-Knox that we talked about, and we're wondering, because they were Church of Ireland, don't forget. But Jonathan will explain the relationship. Over to you, sir.
Okay, well, we said that we could find the Holland name in Killymatty-Knox. The likelihood is, given its proximity to this ground zero, if you like, of the Holland name, the earliest mention of the name, the O'Hullen, in 1666, to put that into perspective, by the way, that's the only 3 O'Hullens we could find on the Hearthmoney rolls for the whole of County Tyrone. So the idea of Killyman district or Drumglass district being the heartline would seem to have a lot of weight for that reason almost alone. And there are thousands of names on the 1666 Hearthmoney rolls for Tyrone, but there are only 3 or 2 O'Hullens and an O'Helan. But anyway, Killymatty-Knox, the earliest one we can find in the family tree that we've put together is John Holland, who appears as a freeholder, as Brendan mentioned earlier, along with a Henry Holland. Henry could be his father or he could be his brother. Just not sure. Then we have a son, William, who appears on the Tithe allotment books for 1826, along with a Terence Holland. Now, although this family is effectively Church of Ireland from start to finish, these names are huge clues, okay, and the proximity. So the evidence is mounting fairly strongly that this is likely to have been one of the original Holland families, and somewhere along the line, for economic expediency or otherwise, probably driven by the linen trade, they have jumped ship and become Church of Ireland. So William Holland has 3 children, Charles, Mary, and William, and we can start to trace them in the Griffiths valuation. Now, the Hollands die out in Killymatty-Knox. Margaret is the only one that seems to survive. She marries a William Weir, and the Weirs came from Derry Hoare. And Anne McClellan, is she about? Anne is connected to the Weirs, so indirectly, Anne, a Holland. But with this marriage, now this is interesting because this is a powerful piece of social history. So the Holland name dies out. But the Weirs, for want of a expression, I don't know whether they're so much a lesser status or not, but the point is when William marries Margaret, it's him who inherits the Holland land in Killymatty-Knox. Now, it's not a massive amount of land, but it's still a holding. So look what William does. he names his son, Charles, in deference to his father-in-law. And in fact, we see other things carrying on through. Okay, he's a William. We see a Mary here. His wife's name's Margaret. So was the Mary again a deference to his father-in-law's sister? But we're able to track those weirs on down in Killimatty at least until around 1905. Interesting thing about religion, just confirming on that. In the 1901 census, the Hollands in house number 2, Killimatty, Presbyterian, but the other set, Charles, Emma, and William, Methodist. So there's a bit of moving about between denominations. But that just explains the Killimatty. So the likelihood is this is part of the same Holland genetic, progenitor in the Killyman area, and this is just one of the branches making their way on down.
Excellent. And one of the other things about that is they actually lived, if you know Weir's Hill, on your way into Dungannon on the Ochnatlai Road, there's a bad bend which goes round to your right as you head towards town. That land on the apex of the bend on the right-hand side belonged to the Weirs, and before that, the Hollands. Okay. Here we have the Hollands of Curran Clonfecal. And again, we think these Hollands are Church of Ireland. Yeah. So we have a Francis Holland, and then his children are Patrick Holland, who has 2 wives, the first one being Susan Burton, and the second one being Annie Gilpin, all in the Benburb area. And then his grandson is Thomas Holland, born the 4th of April, 1892, Sarah Jane Holland, Susan Holland, and then George Neal, who that's her husband. So again, we see this naming convention coming back. You see, the Thomas is in deference to somebody in the previous generation or 2 generations beforehand. So even though they've changed religion, their culture hasn't changed one iota in terms of naming. Okay, Jonathan. Now, descendants of Patrick Holland in Dungannon. Now, this is another Patrick Holland. This Patrick Holland lived in Savings Bank Street. Am I right? Which is that little street on the way up to the old courier office. It used to be a little row of tenement cottages. But this guy, Patrick Holland, was actually the GAA County Secretary in the early part of the last century. Bertie Foley of Dungannon Clerks here will confirm that. And he actually was County Secretary at the time that there was an election in 1918, which is a very famous one, where Sinn Féin emerged from nowhere to be the largest political party. But Patrick was a supporter of the Redmond branch, and there was a meeting the Redmondites were having in Dungannon, which ended up in a bit of a schmuzzle, as they say, between the Redmondites and the Sinn Féiners, and he got a whack on the back of the head. And by October of that year, in fact, he joined the Royal Flying Corps and went off to Scotland. So he left his GAA job and his other job, whatever that was, behind him. And Jonathan's been able to trace him and his family right down to today, and we've been in contact with them. And not only that, we found his grave in Sydney, Australia. So, this is just one person who got lost in the mist of history. And I would submit probably the last Holland of the branch of the family living in Dungannon at that time. And that's Patrick Holland of Savings Bank Street. Anybody think he looks like a Holland? Okay, so we move on. And we now move to the Hollands of Clogher. Now, I got this about 10:30 last night, so it's a bit brief, but nevertheless, it's interesting if you look at the names. We have Mal here, who is in the row here over on the right-hand side, beside Pat. He's a twin, believe it or not. Where did he get that out of? I don't know. He's got brothers Declan and Patrick, and his dad, Patrick. Is Patrick here? Yeah, there he is. And then his brother is his first cousin is Pat and Claudia, and another first cousins are Michael, Sean, and Seamus. Patrick's the son of Joseph, who had brothers John and Patrick, and the father was Patrick. And then the previous generation was Cormac. So, naming convention. Patrick, skip a generation, Patrick. Okay? So you can see it, Patrick here, Patrick here, Patrick here. There's no question we're talking about the same Hollands here, because the names, the Christian names, are so similar. Okay. Now here's an interesting group. Do you remember I told you about the town land that Terry McShane couldn't find? Peter O'Connor was, because he lives in Edendork. Terry lives in Killyman. Well, do you remember I told you about the colliery that was in it? Well, at that time, there was a mining company in Consett in Durham who were a bit like My Meats and, My Park and Dundee today, going as far as they could to recruit workers, because they had a huge coal mine and an iron works in a little place called Lydgate in Consett near Durham, or Consett in the county of Durham. And we know now from looking at records and from the help of a guy called Brian Harrison. Now, Brian hopefully is watching this tonight, because he has been of enormous help to us in getting this information and putting it together. Now, do you remember I told you to keep an eye out on the John and the James Holland? Okay. We have an Edward Holland and a James Holland. That's the James of the twins. Okay. They were living in Killibrackie. And Patrick was born in Ireland, but he took off with his family. And these are the family that was born in Consett. And you can see the names are Jane, Anne, Mary, Bernard, Margaret, Susan, and Patrick. And then in the next generation, Mary's got children called Mary, Bridget, Eric. I can't quite read it from there. And then Mary was born in 1892, married but died without children, without issue. Bernard, on the other hand, was an interesting guy because he had two sons, Edward and Bernard. And they were born in 1904 and 1908. Now, my first cousin, Teresa, who came all the way from Dublin for this talk tonight now, thinking she's half mad, but there you go. And Lawrence, who's there, and Brian, who's over here, and Dominic. Oh yeah, he's hiding. Therefore, children of Bernard Holland, our uncle. And my father was Edward Holland. And they were both born literally about the same time as these two men. Now, that's the same generation. This is the generation of our grandfathers. Patrick Holland, above that, is the great-grandfather. And James Holland is the great-great-grandfather. Now, talk about the naming convention sticking. Didn't matter that they went to Durham, they still carried on that naming convention. And it's that helps to tell us that these, in fact, are our relations. And of course, the James was born at a time in 1788, along with his twin brother, John. So we believe that these Hollands, of which none survive in Consett that we can find, they've dispersed into different parts of England. So anybody who's up for a bit of tracing or a bit of, what do you call it? You can get stuck into that. Okay, and here we have the census of 1871, and we can see Patrick Hollands, the head of the family, with his wife, Susanna. His wife was Daly, and the Dalys were in Akinduff and Killishall at the time. In fact, Marie Quinn, one of our wonderful founding members, is a Daly herself to her maiden name, and lives next door to my brother Frank, where we were all reared in Akinduff. So I think there's a connection there. Even in the next generation, we find that one of the Hollands married a woman called Donnelly. So it wasn't just the Hollands that moved to Consett. You had virtually a whole community of Tyrone people moving to Consett, because we're getting into the fringe of the famine. On a period of time, just after the Napoleonic Wars, when times were really bad, there was a huge economic downturn, and the linen industry, demand for it had dropped for two reasons. One, the war was over with Napoleon. Therefore, the demand in a war economy always drops when the war's over. And secondly, cotton was starting to make its way into the popular choice of cloth for clothing and so on. So that meant that people had to find alternative employment. And before they left, most of these people would have had little spinning wheels in their houses. And that was their main source of income, because the amount of land that they had was such that it just wouldn't, under any circumstances, be at all sustainable. Okay. So I moved to the Hollands in Killishall, and since I need a glass of water, I'm going to hand over to Jerome.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? As my brother mentioned to you, I am the runt of the litter of Eddie Hollands Group. Most of you would remember me from about 4 stone ago. I've been enjoying my years of leisure for the last number of years, and it's showing, unfortunately, but there we go. Brandon has alluded to, so far, to the Holland connection in the South Tyrone area, also around the Clogher area as well. I'm going to move to zone in on the Killishall area. And while I'm not suggesting what Brandon is saying and Jonathan is saying, I can put my hand on my heart and say that everybody in the room is definitely the one connection. And there's one man responsible for the lot of us. And that's a man called John Holland, who we believe was a twin. So, Jonathan, can we have a look at the first slide? This is I know it's difficult for you all folks to see these, but this is actually a map around it's 1798, I believe, and it was done by a guy called Longfield. And it's the townland of Akinduff. And I have copies of this. I actually found this about 30 years ago in the Public Records Office, Jonathan, and it was a freehand drawn copy. But this is actually the original, and it's also done in freehand as well. But it's a clearer version than the one that I have. But it effectively shows you the first drawing out of land and the first time that Akinduff would have been populated to any great extent. The land was drawn out in linear strips, with each family getting a strip of land. And there are 2 small rivers running down Akinduff. And you'd notice that the land effectively runs from one little stream to the other for obvious benefits, because there was lots of work involved in the linen industry, flax particularly, and the water source was needed to propagate the growth of the linen. And in actual fact, I've come across the sale of Akinduff 17, 18 years later. It was sold by the Stewart family, who were the landlords who built Stewartstown. They sold it to the Goffs, who are connected to anybody interested in the GGs, the Goff stud farmed outside Dublin. But the Goffs purchased Akinduff in 1817, along with a lot of other town lands, for the princely sum of £300. And this map was drawn up, as I said to you earlier, in strips. You can see, if you had you can see it closer. You can see the names of each family who were on it. And the first Holland we have in Egenduff is a Brian Holland. Bernard, Barney, Brian, whatever you want to call him. Okay? We believe he died in 1808 because a Felix Holland took on the rent, the tenancy. And when the land was sold to the Goffs in 1817, it referred to the land that was owned by Felix Holland as having 11 years to run. Okay? The tenancy arrangement was 20 years or one life. That was the arrangement. 20 years or one life. So from that, we can conclude that Felix Holland inherited the land in 1808, and he died in 1824, 4 years before that happened. And again, it's supposition, but I'm fairly happy that that land was divided again, as was the custom, between three sons. And if I could just refer to some of my notes here. The three sons, I believe, are John Jr., who married Mary Donnelly, and Owen, who married Bridget somebody, but it's marked down as Bridget Holland, but it could have been another Holland, and a Thomas. So they were effectively, and those three brothers had 17 children between 1816 and 1846. And again, we talk about the disappearing Hollands from around the Dungannon area. But these Hollands were all alive and well in Egenduff in the 1820s and 30s, and they've disappeared. I would imagine, and I have no evidence for it, but I would imagine that, like a lot of other people, they emigrated. But that's just one particular example of the Hollands in the area. The Tithe of Plotman books that were referred to earlier were books that were drawn up. A tithe is a tenth, and there were charges essentially to the established church that the tenants had to pay. And in 1829, in Egenduff, we had John Holland Jr., we had the Owen Holland and the Thomas Holland, who I've referred to, which I believe were three brothers, the issue of Felix Holland. Then we also had John Holland Sr., and we believe that for our generation, is our great-great-grandfather. Okay, a twin. And then there's also a Daniel Holland. And looking at the way that the land, the tenancy is listed, it starts at the top end of the town land and works round towards where Egenduff Chapel is now. And there was a Daniel Holland there who had 6 acres as well. And at the same time, you had a Michael Holland in Killisheed with 4 acres and a Daniel Holland who had 29 acres. So all those Hollands, apart from John Holland, have essentially disappeared into the ether. Now, difficult to see this one, folks, but give me a second.
He's technologically illiterate, that's why he refers to hard copy on the tape.
And even if I was technically literate, the people at the back wouldn't see the slide anyway. So, I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but what I have done, I did this about, again, 30 years ago, but I've only got it typed up about 2 months ago, maybe less. But on the left, we have family names of people who lived in Egenduff between the first year. This column here is 1798. The next one is 1817, 1829, 1860, 1878. These are, there are events that take place in those 5 years, which gives us the list of tenants and the holding in that year. So from the top, we have the Conlon family, who only appeared in 1860 and were there in 1878. Then we have the Doyle family, and the Doyle family was particularly popular. 1798, they had 60 acres, moving down to 1878, 38 acres. And we have actually been in contact with an ancestor of the Doyles, again, 30 odd years ago, a guy who's living in Scotland, and he was trying to trace his family tree at that time as well. Then we have the McCluskey family, who only appeared in 1860 and have disappeared since. The McGilly family, I believe they lived where Marie Quinn currently lives. They had a holding. Then we had the Boyles, the McGones, who had 6 acres and only appeared in 1860. Then we had the popular Kelly family. We had the Donnelly family, who first appeared in 1829, and they lived where Alphonsus, Holland, and Teresa currently live. We then have the Holland family, who started there in 1798 with 22 acres. 1817 had 22 acres. 1829 that moved up to 35 acres, and that really was to do with the coming to Akenduff of our great grandfather John Holland from Killishall, and he took over the tenancy of a parcel of land called Kelly's, and it was subsequently owned by Barney Holland. That's Teresa, Brian, Dominic, and Lawrence's father. Then we have the Hamills. Then we have the Dailies. Again, that's Marie's connection. We have the Loughran's, McQuaid. The O'Neills are a popular family in Akenduff, but they only came into the townland in sometime between 1829 and 1860. Then we had Neelis, MacTaggart, Devlin, McManus. The widow Martin appeared, it's like top of the pops. She only appeared once with 3 acres in 1829. Then we have McCormick, Haughey, and McElhone. So that's just a feel for the spread of families. But not only that, it also gives us continuity. It shows us continuity of family residence in the townland, if that makes sense. What have we got next? Right. This is closer to home, folks. This is just one branch of the Holland connection. We'll start at the bottom as ever. Yours truly over here with our siblings, our father Edward. Over here we have Brian, Teresa, Dominic, and Lawrence, Maura, and Anne. Their father Barney. Then we have their sister Cassie and their sister Mary Ann, who married Michael Vogue. In actual fact, I was at Mary Ann's grave this evening on my way up here. She was obviously our aunt, and it's unfortunate that there seems to be a theme of mothers dying and giving birth. Our own father died. His mother died giving birth to him. His brother Barney, his first wife, Annie Devine, died giving birth to Anne. And then Barney and Eddie's eldest sister, Mary Ann, who married Michael Vogue, died giving birth to Edward. Unfortunately, Edward died some hours later as well. So there's an unfortunate recurrence of that particular issue. Now, if we go back up, in all cases, this leads to Edward Holland, who married a Jane McCahey. Again, I told you earlier she died in childbirth, having her dad. His father was a Bernard Holland, and that brings in the Tully Allen connection, who Kieran's here and Marion's here. Your grandfather was a brother. Sorry, son, a brother of him. Okay? So then we go back Again, we remember we talked about the naming conventions. We go back to Bernard, a twin, although the gravestones show them being 4 years apart, but that goes to show you can't trust gravestones. And their father was John Holland. And this is the man who we know came to Eckendorf around the mid-1820s. And we believe he was a twin of the James Holland Brendan referred to in earlier slides. And if that's the case, then we know that their father was an Edward Holland. And they are recorded in the Dungannon parish records being born around 1785. So that's that branch of the Hollands, right? Now, the next branch we have here, we have Kieran. I see Kieran here tonight and his siblings. Their father is Barney. Note the name. Paul's here tonight. His father was Arthur. Then we had Annie Holland, who had Brian Lafferty and Mary Lafferty. Johnny Holland, who had Alphonsus and Malachi, who are here, along with Peter, Eugene, Leo, Sheila, and Margaret. And then Mary Agnes, who was the eldest, didn't actually marry and had I would say, to be honest with you, a difficult life. Spent mostly caring for elderly relatives. She was sent to in-laws when she was very young, brought up there to the extent that she had little or no connection with the rest of her siblings. And I'm told as well that she was so organized that prior to her death, she had her funeral arrangements made. She had all the mirrors in the house covered. She had her candles ready and all the various bits and pieces of that would be required to lay out a corpse. Interesting woman. So that's that family. Their father is a John Holland. And again, his father were back to the Barney, the John, and the Edward. Okay. Yeah, well, I'll go to the next slide and I'll explain that one because they're here. Right, so this is what we call the Tully Allens branch of the family. Again, we have Agnes, who I believe my father stood for when he was only 16 years of age. Agnes was married to a gentleman called Brooks, and they had 3 children. Then over here we have Ethna, who married Eddie McAnallen, and Kieran, Colette, Francis, Renus, Brian, Ethna, and Eamon. And I see Kieran and Renus over there. Then we have Sally, who married Tommy Campbell. They had a big shoe shop in Dungannon. Then we have Vincent, who had Tony, Brian, Moira, Philomena, Vincent, Anne, Kevin, Bernadette, John, and Neil. And Vincent spent most of his adult life working in either Donegal, but mostly in Sligo, where he had a bar, and also in Ross's Point. And Tony's here tonight as well. And Brian. Sorry, I didn't see. Oh, Brian. And Brian's son as well. Okay, so then over here we have Margaret, who married Terry Mulgrew. That's Marion's parents. Then Sissy. Sissy was unmarried, as was Barney. And Tommy, the eldest, Tommy died only 5 years old. Their father, going back, is Bernard Hull, the son of another Bernard. And I've actually got photographs of this man and his wife, Mary McCrory. Mary Murphy, if anyone wants to have a look at them later. Now, this is the Bernard Hull, our great-grandfather. He was the man, along with the son of the twin, but son of John. It gets a bit complicated. This Bernard had a twin brother, Edward. He married a woman called Anne Loughran, who apparently was only about 17 when they got married. He died in 1874, age 45. with consumption, which was a form of TB, which was quite prevalent at the time. His son Patrick, aged 13, died 40 days later. Anne Loughran effectively and had to raise this Bernard's family, which there was quite a number of them, 7 of them in total. And she was known to be quite a, how should I put it to you, a rough, bossy woman. Apparently, she was selling pigs one day in the market, and some man offered her a derisory amount for the pigs. And allegedly, she lifted the pig by the hind legs, hit him a slap with it, and put him to the ground. She wasn't a Holland. Okay, so that's, and she was from Cranagy, up beyond Kappa, Altmore. So that's that branch. That's the 3 main branches of the Holland connection, primarily who were all brought from this land into being in Eichenduff. Next one, Jonathan. Yes. Sure, Kieran. Yes. Right. Is there a little dog in it? That's him and his wife. Is that the one you have, Kieran? Yeah. Sure, Kieran, of course. What year did they come to Tullyallen? Right. Yeah. That's right. It's no longer there. Yeah. Now, actually, he went to work as a blacksmith in America first, and then he came back. And I have to refer to my notes now. I'm not exactly sure of the year, but if you bear with me 1 second. Okay, he was born in 1862, Kieran, right? And he married after he returned from America in February 05. So that's 30, he was 43 when he got married. So I would imagine he probably, I'm guessing probably the late 1899s is when he went to Tullyallen. I'm guessing. Any other questions, folks, on that? I don't believe there was. I think he married into the Murphys. Now I think they lived in Mullinahunch for a period of time. Just hold on a sec. These are handwritten notes I took when my mum and dad were alive, and they're anecdotal, but they gave us some insight. He went to work in America as a blacksmith for a number of years. He returned home and bought the farm in Tullyallen from McKenna's, where he was hired out as a boy. If that helps. That wouldn't surprise me indeed. That's interesting. Yeah, it's Vincent Holland, his son, has said that when Bernard Holland went to the States, he worked in gold mining, and it was quite a lucrative trade, obviously, and that gave him sufficient money to come back and be able to buy the land from the McKennas. Yeah. Well, Kieran, if I could ask you to have a look at that, and we'll record that because it's important. Okay, Jonathan, do you want to take on the next? We're on the next one, right? Oh, we're back to the disappearing Hollands again. As I mentioned to you earlier, there's a lot of Hollands who have, well, they've either done a runner or they've. Anyway, I'll hand you back to Brandon.
Okay. These are families we found on the Kilishal Parish Register of baptisms and marriages and deaths and so on. But you see that the children go from around 1815 all the way up to 1843, 1846, in fact. The last born was Eleanor, a son of, or daughter of John Holland and Mary Donnelly. Now, all 6 of these families either left Kilishal or Raconduff. And we think 5 of them ended in Ontario in Canada, in a little village called Agila, or township called Agila. And I'll show you someone who is a descendant of, we think, perhaps this man, we're not sure, or this man here, okay? Now, if you take number 2, Michael Holland and Mary Heverin, we know quite a bit about him. He was the holder of all of 4.2 acres in Kilishal. And quite clearly, in disadvantaged circumstances, the only thing open to him was to hop on a boat. Now, we were told that they emigrated in 1830. In fact, we even found the ship that the passengers were on. And they ended up in Gros Isle in St. Lawrence River in Canada. And that lady that he was married to, Mary Heverin, her people were from Garvahay near Omagh, between Omagh and Ballygawley. And they stopped and settled in a little village called Rawdon, or a township called Rawdon. And from marriage records that we've recovered from there, it's almost like a wee village of Tyrone people, because there were Mullins and Dailies and Quinns and all the usual familiar names and O'Neills. But the reason they went to that place is because Mary Heverin's 2 brothers were there. John Heverin, I think, and Patrick Heverin. A most unusual name, Heverin, if you think about it. There are very few of them around even today. But Anne stayed in Rawdon in Quebec, and the rest of the family headed on with their relations to Ontario. And she grew up with her uncle's family, and she married a man called Prudent Beauchamp. Beauchamp is the French word for fields, or if you like, good fields. This is French-speaking Canada we're talking about. And we made contact then with this family with the help, and I have to say I'm forever grateful to her, of Patricia McClernon. Patricia is a genealogist that I could only recommend to the highest degree. If you want to find out something good or bad about your family, she'll do it. But if we move on then to the next one, here we have the descendants of Anne Holland. And if we look at it here, we see Michael and Mary, and then their children, Anne, who's married to Prudent Beauchamp, her brother Bernard, sister Jane, and Michael. Now, this Michael was born the year that they emigrated. In fact, the one thing that's not on that is a twin sister. There you go again. And Anne's husband produced Prudent Beauchamp II, and he married Jean Bocage with an E-A-U or an O. In 1877 in Sacré-Cœur de Jésus in Quebec, Canada. And their children were Jean-Baptiste Beauchamp, marrying Lima Laporte. And then their children, and so on, right down to here. And we come across this lady. Now, if we go, that's father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, and great-great-grandmother, Anne Holland. And this lady will be watching this tonight in Montreal. So, bonsoir, Jocelyn. I've been in constant contact with her over the last year. And one of the interesting things about Michael is that we thought he emigrated in 1830, with his wife. But he didn't. His wife and children went ahead. And in 1832, about a year, just over a year later, he was doing best man for a neighbour in Akenduff or in Killishel. So clearly he either went later than that, but Jocelyn's family have no trace of him. We don't know what happened to him. Whether he died on the way out to Canada or died before even he went, we don't know. Okay. By the way, this is Jocelyn's DNA. 29% Ireland and Scotland. And she would be a lot of people's distant cousin that are sitting here tonight. So if we had a camera, we'd ask you all to wave, but we don't. Okay. And here's the marriage of Patrick Heverin and Mary Quinn of this parish. This is the parish of Rawdon, with James Heverin and Marion Catherine Quinn, who declare no reason against this marriage. Now, this is the English translation of the French. Just it gives you an indication. The reason I include this is because of all the names that are so familiar to us. That's in this French-speaking area of Canada. Okay, Jonathan. Now, the other Hollands went to Adula in Ontario. And here we have Felix Holland, died August 1855, aged 30 years, native of County Tyrone, Ireland. Died 1885, aged 55. So he was born in 1830. Could he, in fact, have been a son of Michael's brother or first cousin or whatever? Almost certainly, yeah. Okay. And this is the last Holland that we know of that is a descendant of those Hollands, Daniel Francis Holland, who moved from Ontario to New York. And the photograph was taken sometime in the 1920s. That's all we know. Okay. And that, folks, wraps it up. That tells us, that's all we know about the Hollands. You're all welcome to ask questions. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're a Holland or not a Holland. It's not important. So it's open to the floor, folks. Patrick.
You haven't mentioned any of the Hollands in Ashdown, Dorlis, or Coolmore, I think it is. Quite a number of them down there.
That being in Monaghan.
No, they're actually, there's 12 parishes, 12 townlands on the Tyrone side of the border. They actually belong to the Arab. And the trouble is those 12.
Yeah. Yeah. As I explained to Patrick last night, the only contact I have with the Hollands of that area is through Mal here and his family. It's an area we need to investigate further. I agree with you. Absolutely. Absolutely. Pat. Yeah. Yeah.
One census to the other, the age up to
Yeah.
I still have a name like Patrick Coleman. That's the census of household.
Yes.
He actually married the family. He married my grandmother.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
One thing about it, had a Patrick had a brother called
Patrick.
No
No?
Bernard.
Oh, Bernard, yes.
Bernard, I think somewhere that he's like
Uh-huh.
and they're returning back, turn of the century. I can't imagine it doesn't appear on the whole 1 cent.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And here come back at that stage.
Yeah. What I think is important, Pat, would be making that connection between the Dungannon Hollands and the Clare Hollands, and even Patrick, the Nakatalan Hollands, because going by the naming convention, it's quite clear they all use the same forenames, and that's a very strong, as we said earlier, that's a strong clue as to them being of the same lineage.
In my family, who is a major name in 6 generations and in every family, and yet it's never mentioned much in your group.
Yes, they are. If you go back to the 1664 Hearth Money Rules, Hugh O'Holland. We don't. Well, we haven't been able to actually do the direct lineage, Patrick, but the Hugh is there. There's no question. No, I don't think so. I don't think so, Pat. No, I don't think so. No.
It's a very popular one.
In your family, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. Well, you can see the Bernard, Patrick, Edward, and John, James. Those are the names that keep repeating through the generations. Yeah. Yeah.
That's going on. Here lies John O'Holland, Alice Galley, part of this late 17 July 1770.
Wow.
60.
Yes. Yeah. But that's amazing, because that shows you that the Hollands, they're still in the townland of Ballyskelly, go right back to the late 1600s. And the problem actually is going to be making that connection, because before that, the records are non-existent, Snow on a ditch is right. Uh-huh. Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Getting information in that period is like hen's teeth, it's just impossible to get your hands on it, Of course, yeah. Yeah. They must have a few bob, as Patrick said. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Renus. Well, actually, I can answer that question for you, Renus. Yeah, the Hollands that are in Auchnatroy, we think, are part of that group of Hollands that started in Killimadinux. And then, obviously, through succeeding generations. In fact, I spoke last week to an Olive Holland whose husband was Edward Holland. Again, the connection. Sorry? Cronhill. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, they're again. They would be the same group of Hollands in Creevlough. Yeah, some of them live in Brantry. In fact, one of them only lives. A fellow called Derek Holland only lives a couple of miles from me. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Sorry, Heather. The freeholders were people who were guaranteed tenants, as opposed to, freeholders had an indefinite tenancy, whereas tenants had one life or 3 lives, depending on the religious denomination. Is that correct, Jonathan? Oh, and the right to vote as well. No, we didn't. No. Right. And what? There you go, you see. Got to get to know that guy. That'll be interesting to find out, where they could be connected actually to Pat here from Claddy. I don't know. Are you familiar with that? You know the family? See, there you go, Patrick Holland, Edward Holland, and Brendan Holland. So there has to be a connection. Of course it does. Yeah. He probably is, but he's not O'Halloran, and that's the problem. Yeah. Well, the only Mac Holland that we've seen is the. Oh, Matt Holland. No, I haven't checked him out. No, I suspect he's from Durham, is he? Okay, Pat. I mean, that's worth a checking. Yeah. He probably isn't one of us because he was a good footballer. Peter O'Connor says there was no Hollands any good footballers at all. Okay, folks. Jerome just wants to say a few words before we wrap it up, and I want to thank you all for coming out tonight in such huge numbers. I think this is one of the largest gatherings we've had in the history of the society, and we hope you all be back.
As I am occasioned to say to my wife, I won't keep you long. Seriously though, I just want to reiterate what Brandon had said earlier about the debt of gratitude we owe to Jonathan. Jonathan is a workhorse, a search engine in his own right. It's all very well good getting access to information on a computer, but it's like all computers, you only get out what you put in. And Jonathan has the knowledge, the background knowledge to know where to look. And Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. On behalf of everybody here, thank you.